Good evening. Welcome to the Parrish Art Museum. My name is Corinne Erni. I'm the Senior Curator of ArtsReach and Special Projects here at the Parish. And as we celebrate Earth Day today, we want to explore the relationship between water quality, cultural practices, and environmental activism here on the East End, but obviously with a wider outlook on what's going on in the world. And so we invited 4 panelists who bring very diverse perspectives to the parish tonight. They come from the visual arts, from Indigenous environmental restoration, and marine biology research. So I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists, and they will be giving presentations, so they will be telling us more about who they are and what they do. We'll have Danielle, Hopson-Begun Tela Troge, who are tribal members of the Shinnecock Indian Nation and members of the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers. We also have Gaelin Rosenwaks, who is a marine scientist, explorer, photographer, and filmmaker, and Kathleen J Graves, who is an artist and photographer whose work is based on her love of nature and technology. I would like to thank Brianna Hernandez, our curatorial fellow, who helped putting this panel together. And I also want to acknowledge our sponsors, presenting sponsor Bank of America, with support by Weill Cornell Medicine Southampton and the Corcoran Group. And I would like to invite Tela Troge now to do a land acknowledgement. Thank you.
Hakame. In our Shinnecock language, one of those words still used, even as our language has been banned, is the word for welcome. There is a lesson to be appreciated by that fact, mainly that our Shinnecock people offer a hakame regularly to all of our relatives, daily in thanksgiving to water, air, soil, fish and animals, plants and trees, four-legged and winged at the hand of the Creator. We are gathered here today on ancestral Shinnecock territory, and I welcome you tonight to Shinnecock land. Our people lived freely in Shinnecock until 1859, the time when my own generation's great-grandparents were children, and just because the Long Island Railroad, Southampton town's movers, shakers, and takers, including the likes of Samuel Parrish, forced my people to be relegated to the neck, that neither could sever nor remove these sacred hills from us or dismiss us from them. Maps, deeds, titles, boundary lines, treaties, and edicts come and go, but the Indigenous people and the land to which we belong is forever. Land acknowledgement to open a meeting is not to remind Native people that this is our land. Land acknowledgement is to remind our non-Native neighbors that this is our land, and to remind them that this remains our land, regardless of who might be playing golf, planning mansions, or hospitals, all of which desecrate burials in our unceded and sacred space. Hakame, and welcome to the parish. I am an attorney, a member of the Shinnecock Indian Nation, and a regenerative ocean farmer with the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers. We were established 3 years ago. We focus our efforts on restoring the Shinnecock Bay, which is the water that surrounds our ancestral territory. Recently, within the past 10 years or so, we've seen a really massive decline in water quality, which has only become much worse during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw mass exodus of people coming from New York City and occupying our territory, the Shinnecock Hills, which is a very sacred land to us because it's the home of many of our burials. But it's also an extremely sensitive ecological area. And the overdevelopment combined with lack of septic planning has created the situation where millionaires and billionaires' waste is streaming down into our ancestral waters, which we've depended on for the past 10, 12,000 years since the last ice age to feed our people. Traditionally, it's been a source of great abundance, which has been able to sustain not only Shinnecock people, but all the newcomers, all the colonists, and all the people that call this place home today. And so we have seen this drastic decline in water quality. We've seen rising waters threaten our territory, which is now very limited um, in acreage, supporting almost 2,000 people. We have 800 acres of land on our Shinnecock Neck, and we're constantly facing threat due to ocean acidification, saltwater intrusion, erosion, and the death of all of the marine life that we depend on to eat, because we're in this constant state of economic warfare with the local government and the state government. Even the United States, for some reason, they have taken everything from our people. They have enslaved us, they have stolen our land, they have stolen our language, they've taken every resource. But we consider ourselves to be visionaries who depend on this philosophy of looking forward to the next 7 generations, to ensuring through resiliency that has been passed down to us by our ancestors that we continue to be here. And so that's the spirit of what we're doing to work to regenerate the water that surrounds us and gives us life, because we consider ourselves to be water protectors, because we know that water is life. And we encourage everyone here tonight to share this story, what you learned tonight, with those that you know, because it's going to take a huge network of people to meaningfully mitigate the climate crisis that, it affects Shinnecock people very greatly. It's often, Indigenous or Black frontline communities who suffer the greatest due to the climate crisis, even though oftentimes we are least to blame for it. But we're the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers. We're a Indigenous collective of women. We're intergenerational, so we have youth and we have elders, we have grandmothers who have all combined together to take action. And that's really what it's about. Everyone doing something can meaningfully mitigate this crisis that we're facing. And so I'm here with my fellow Shinnecock kelp farmer, Danielle Hopson-Begun, and she will discuss a little bit about the technical aspects of what we're doing. But the main thing that we're trying to do is to sequester carbon and extract nitrogen from the water. With the overdevelopment and the lack of septic planning, it's created this situation where there's an extraordinary amount of nitrates in the water, which is the cause of the decline in marine life. For example, the Biden administration just declared a federal fisheries disaster zone because there was a 99% death of the scallops in the bay. Like, it's a really bad situation that we're in. But through regenerative ocean farming and kelp farming particularly, we're focusing on a plant called sugar kelp, which has this incredible ability to not only sequester carbon, but it thrives on nitrates and nitrogen. And so the more nitrogen in the water, the better the sugar kelp grows. And so we're trying to break the cycle of runoff into the water by turning the sugar kelp into a fertilizer or soil amendment product that can cut down on nitrates that often seep into the water from chemical fertilizers. And so everything that we're doing is really in the spirit of reciprocity back to Mother Earth, back to the water, back to all of the plants and animals that call the water home. And it's also strongly connected to our work of land defense and righting this historic injustice that has happened to our people since 1859 with the theft of the Shinnecock Hills, and just constantly trying to raise awareness to stop the overdevelopment of the area for all of our sakes and the sake of the water quality, and trying to reduce some of the damage that has been done. If we all work together, we can again meaningfully mitigate this climate crisis. And so I'll introduce you to my colleague Danielle Hopson-Begun, and she'll give you just some of the technical aspects of what we do.
Colleague and cousin, thank you. My name is Danielle. I wear a few different hats with Shinnecock Kelp Farmers. I am a kelp farmer. I'm a hatchery technician. I farm every other day out in Shinnecock Bay, and I also handle some of our communications. So we have built the first Indigenous women-owned hatchery, kelp hatchery, on the eastern seaboard. We work with two partners. One is the Sisters of St. Joseph, which is where our hatchery is, as well as our farm. And we also work with Greenwave. So what you're seeing right there are 18 spools. Thank you. 18 spools that we started with. We started with microscopic seeds that we impregnated lines. Each of those spools has about 100 feet of line. We impregnate the lines and then we send them out and outplant them into Shinnecock Bay. You can see how they're unfurled onto a heavier marine rope. And then we just check them constantly. That's our colleague Donna out. So this is when we were in our hatchery. One of the most important aspects of growing kelp seed is sanitation. We were scrupulous with our sanitation this year. We changed our water weekly. We could have waited 2 weeks before we changed, but we don't. We change weekly. And because of that, we had a very successful year. I don't know who that is out in the water. This was the other day. We go out. We're really tied to the tides. We farm at the lowest tides. So this morning I was outside at about 7 o'clock. It was a beautiful day, but we've also been out since December 30th where it wasn't so beautiful and freezing. This is Tela and I out at SAC a few weeks ago. And this is just when our kelp began to grow. It's a very tedious and scary thing to have everything riding on these little tiny seeds. But we've been very successful and they're starting to grow. Right now we have 8 lines and up to maybe 16 inches of kelp, maybe 24 inches as of today. This is more pictures of our hatchery. This is one of our partners, Sister Carrie. She is a doll and goes out with us often. As you can see, her smiling face, she is thrilled. Again, so the last, our nemesis this year has been something called ectocarpus, and we were not anticipating it. It's basically an algae that covered our seeded lines, suffocating them. So we had to manually remove it very often, which is why we were out so often this year. What you're seeing there is our farm from above. We have 8 lines. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's very faint. We've been doing very well. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, that's awesome. I think it's just such a cool project, and I'm so excited to visit soon. And I think when we were all chatting in advance of this panel, the one thing that really came out for me that resonated was the idea of water protector. And you guys are doing it on a local scale, and I think it's amazing. And I work both locally and globally. So I'm going to take you guys on a little bit of a journey to show you some of the things that I've encountered in all of my different explorations. Um, So I work a lot with big predators, but I'm not going to talk much about big predators. But my journey started here on Long Island when I saw this young whale who was sick. And I think that it goes back to community. And I think all of our work as water protectors is about rallying a community behind people. And this baby whale, his name was Feisty. It was in 1981, stranded on the beaches of Long Island by Robert Moses State Park. And a community of people rallied to get him well and set him free. I wasn't even 2 years old, but my mother took me to see this baby whale, and it made a huge impression on me. And that is, and here's a picture with some watermen. They figured out he had pneumonia, gave him antibiotics. Some of you may have seen Feisty or heard of Feisty back in the early 80s. And really, thousands of people came and rallied behind him, but a group of watermen really took action and were able to then release him back to the wild. So we'll get back to Feisty in a little bit later. But I like to start with that because that's really where my journey began. And I think learning about community and how teams can work together to change it, to change and really move the needle with things. And Feisty actually had a huge impact on whale conservation back then. But my career journey then started about 20 years later when I ended up on this ship in the Antarctic. And working in the Antarctic was amazing. And part of the reason why I always like to start with this expedition and talking about it is because it was super challenging in every way, mentally, physically, but I learned so much. We were in huge seas. I was low man on the totem pole, so I was, getting to sort all of the different plankton. And why is that important? Well, now we're seeing all of these declines because of ocean acidification. The plankton isn't as plentiful. And what's the most important animal in the Antarctic? It's krill. So with ocean acidification, everything is changing. But also ice is extremely important in almost all of the work I've done in the poles. So here, with a huge iceberg behind it, now we know that there's so far fewer ice, sea ice and everything. So I switched gears shortly after that, and I started working again in big seas because that seems to be a trend in everything that I do. But I started working on the bluefin tuna. So bluefin are one of the most prized fish in the ocean for food, for sashimi. Fish sell for millions of dollars, a single fish. But that's not why I was studying them. I was studying them because we wanted to learn about where they were going in the ocean so that we could manage them properly. So here we're looking at a bluefin coming on board to get tagged. And then we were putting the tags in the fish to learn where they go. So electronic tags, so little mini hard drives. And now I think people are really familiar with the sharks that are tracked. And so we do the same thing for tunas, except they don't come to the surface, so it's not real-time data. We have to wait a few months or a year or multiple years until we get the data. But we learned that Atlantic bluefin tuna that we have off of our beaches, some of you may have seen them last summer. They were actually in close on all of the schools of Menhaden, which was pretty amazing to see them this close into shore. But they travel across the ocean and they use the entire Atlantic Ocean basin. And it's absolutely amazing. So how do we manage a fish that's moving back and forth? But really, so we look at them as scientists, and then other people look at them as a commodity, and they look at a resource. And so here's a commercial fishing operation. This is actually in Nova Scotia, where a giant bluefin was killed, and then sent to Japan, where it was going to be eaten or sold. And we eat bluefin here too, unfortunately, but most actually goes through the Tokyo market before it's even shipped back here. But also relating to how different people interact with the ocean and resources, and looking at it from a cultural perspective as well, and how different communities interact with it. There's a lot of players that we need to think about when we think about conserving things like tunas. To switch gears entirely and go back to the poles. We're going to go back to the Arctic. I only have a couple minutes and I want to take you on lots of different places and just plant a lot of different seeds. So this is up in the Arctic. This is the Northwest Passages. And why do I want to show these expeditions? So what we were looking at is actually what seasonal sea ice is doing and what role it plays in the Arctic ecosystem. And why is that important? Well, because there's no longer as much sea ice, if any sea ice, in so many of the different places. So this is in the Northwest Passages. This is newly forming sea ice. There's also multi-year ice up there. Again, really rough seas, doing all kinds of interesting work to learn about the entire ecosystem. Drilling ice cores. I always show these two pictures. So this picture, we're drilling an ice core. This is in the northern Bering Sea. This area of the Bering Sea has now not been frozen for over 5 years. And seasonal sea ice plays an extremely important role in the Bering Sea ecosystem. So we think about most of our commercially caught seafood is actually from that area of the world. And so you've got your king crab, you've got your pollock, that would be in like a fillet of fish sandwich. or lots of different things. And so now without the seasonal sea ice, with algae, the ice algae that's in the seasonal sea ice melting into it, it's really decreasing the productivity of the Bering Sea. I always have to throw in other animals. So I'm talking a lot about how we are using the ocean as resources, but of course there's walruses and polar bears and all sorts of other creatures that are living up there that are dependent on these ecosystems and dependent on the ice being there. And again, just like little bergy bits that shouldn't, it shouldn't be just floating there like that. Normally they're, you see this in this kind of like iconic image to see this with a polar bear floating on it, but obviously that's not there. But still, you can see that there's newly forming ice. This is multi-year ice that is now going to be gone very shortly because it's melting. Switching gears now to another expedition. This was in the Blue Hole in Belize, where we were actually going to the bottom of the Blue Hole. And in order to do that, we had to do that with submarines. And so why am I taking you here? Well, it's very remote at the bottom. Very few people have been there because it's over 400 feet. So you can't dive there with scuba gear. And so we needed submersibles to get down there. So when we were going down there, I mean, it's an incredible structure. Geologically, it's incredible. It was 20,000 years ago, a cave system. So with sea level rise in the past 20,000 years, it became submerged. So sea level rise is something that's been happening. We're coming out of our ice age, but we're just making it happen faster. But so that's part of what the expedition to the Blue Hole was looking at. It was looking at sea level rise over the past 20,000 years. But what we found at the bottom was a lot of plastic. And that's what happens almost everywhere. So what is our role and what do we do? We're polluting the ocean and we're polluting Shinnecock. We're polluting the most remote places in the world. Everywhere we're seeing human impacts. So here you can see there's a scuba fin and a Coke bottle right next to it. And really the entire bottom of the Blue Hole was just littered with plastic pollution and with plastic waste. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my newest project, which is a film called Finding PHYSTY. So going back to that little whale that I saw when I was just a toddler, I decided now 40 years later that this is a story I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell how a community rallied around this whale and they got him well, set him free. I wanted to ask the question, where would PHYSTY be? Where should he have been back when he was a 5-year-old whale? And where would he be now had he, and most probably did, survive? So as a 45-year-old whale. So tying back into community, we're a community of people, and here I am next to a sperm whale, so it's taken me to Dominica. I wanted to learn about whales, and I wanted to spend time with these whales, make that same eye connection that I had when I was little, and they penetrate into your soul, which is absolutely incredible. I've been very fortunate that this is very much a mother-daughter story. It's really about family and community, and these whales live in families. The mothers stay with their children. They teach them culture and they pass it down much like we do. So here's a pregnant female who decided that she really liked me. Moms and babies. This is about a year-old baby swimming with her mom. That's Ariel and Soursop for anybody who wants to know. Their grandmother's name is Fruit Salad. They all have names. They would all be identified and they're living together. And what is so incredible is that these whales have come back because humans played a role and took action to stop commercial whaling. And not the whaling of the colonial times, we were taking just a few whales, but commercial whaling really decimated them in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, where it was industrial scale whaling with those massive harpoons and massive ships. But fortunately, we were able to keep most of our whales in the water, or many whales in the water, enough that they could have babies so that we can take images and see the 3 generations of whales learning from each other. And you can see the baby is copying her mom and her grandmother as they're swimming along. And it's really just an incredible story of the importance of community and taking action. I always like to end when I talk about anything on the East End with just a few pictures of our local wildlife offshore. So here's a blue shark. These are all pictures that I took here off of Montauk. And then, so another blue shark, some dolphins. I don't know if anybody sees the dolphins. We see them off the beach all the time. This is in the bay, and we see the babies and the moms. I've had some drone footage that, is just incredible, like literally thousands of dolphins. You only see a few on the surface. And seals, of course, we see the seals. And then we've been lucky enough to have snowy owls visit us this winter in particular. And then bringing it back to the waste that we put into the ocean. And so looking at this as fishing some fishing line. This is a lobster that's got tons of eggs. It's a gravid female, and she was completely entangled. I actually was fishing when I caught this lobster, and she was completely entangled in other people's fishing gear. And while it's nice to know what other people are using when they're bottom fishing for fluke and sea bass and everything, it was very disheartening to see this lobster just completely entangled. I did free her, and she went back into the ocean and hopefully had her babies. And then, of course, plastic waste. We're lucky. We did pass quite a few bans to ban helium balloons, but we find them in the ocean all the time. And they're often covered with little things. These are actually crab larvae that have used the balloon as a shelter. So anyway, and yeah, so now I'm going to pass the baton to Kathleen.
Thank you, Gaelin.
So it is really my pleasure to.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to share this panel with all of you. This is very exciting. My name is Kathleen J Graves, and my mixed media artwork is about landscape and nature, AI technology, endangered animals, young people who will live to the future, and climate change. I use iconic symbols that are meaningful to us, such as the green sea turtle and the black rhino. In my photographs, I create imaginary AI bots who observe in the landscape. I use ephemera and trash to make bot studies resembling cultural characters. My recent photographs of landscape, titled Thresholds in Nature, are seeking a threshold of environmental repair. This first piece, the green sea turtle, is about a most magnificent creature that is endangered. Injury from human plastics and her real despair are not shown by me. I chose to represent the fullness of her being, so grand and full. I think it's important that the sea turtle piece reveals a history. There is hand sewing, manufactured fabric, and ribbons mixed with contemporary digital drawing. This historical storytelling through process demonstrates a longevity that I compare to the greater age and longevity of the green sea turtle. Dami and the sea turtle are looking at a threshold in nature. They are looking at a stairway where danger and language mingle to find a way to communicate to each other. This is called sand runnel with a threshold. This is called tercerima. There are sand cliffs with scrub trees that are natural thresholds, and we can't see what is beyond. Interspersed is an endangered horseshoe crab finding its way back into the ocean. I believe nature and technology are the issues of our time. These next pieces are called Dark Days, Dark Garden, and Garden Bots. In my work about nature and climate change, I incorporate imaginary nanobots into the landscape. The bots are artificially intelligent observers. My imaginary bots often appear jelly-like and reflective, and I draw them in different ways and freely adapt their appearance in each image. After Superstorm Sandy, I addressed flooding on Long Island and our fears of the increased danger of storms. Also embedded in all of my gardens and landscapes is the grace and beauty of nature that all humans need and crave. It is important, I think, to look at and try out technologies that may work to improve environmental conditions. I want my viewers to consider both the friendly use of AI, bot technology and the invasive or dangerous possibilities. Consideration now helps us frame and decide what we want our technology to do. Sorry, the last one, I gave you no time to see it. I also make what I call bot studies. The bot studies are anthropomorphic characters with an animating spirit. Made from throwaway materials, retroelectronics, and natural ephemera, they are hanging sculptures influenced by 20th century constructivism. This is the natural history bot, Black Rhino. The ornaments echo colonialism, and the black rhino is endangered, often killed for its horns. The collector's box bot is a self-portrait. My bot avatar is at the center with natural objects organized around me and LED lights inside the avatar. I hope sea turtles and humans will live on into the future. With each animal we lose histories and stories. I ask, what has changed us from a time of verbal storytelling to the present? The richness of seeing backwards to original stories helps us find our purpose and what we consciously value. In the folklore of the Iroquois and Lenape tribes, a turtle island was formed when the Great Spirit put a massive rock on the back of the turtle to provide land for the people of North America. We are living on Turtle Island.
Thank you. I want to thank every one of you for sharing your very compelling stories about how you not only understand the problems that we're facing with the environment, but how you all address it in your very specific area and your specific way. I think a lot of what I'm hearing here is about community, about collaboration. And I want to begin with Tela and Danielle. How do you engage different kinds of people? How do you engage communities in this area, but also policymakers who can help to actually bring about changes? Because I mean, the way you describe the situation, Tela, it seems very, very serious. You know what we have here, and I think a lot of people don't actually realize that.
So that's a really good question. We're all about building collectives and networks, and we're constantly trying to expand with like-minded partners. So we've really been doing a lot of work in relationship building. It's so important to get to know your neighbor and sit down and talk to each other and find that you have these shared concerns and compassions about these critical issues. And so I think that, thinking civically minded, we can reach out to legislators who are having the capabilities to pass laws. I don't think that environmental problems can be really addressed by policy, but I also don't think it hurts to try to talk to lawmakers and educate them about the issues. So much of the work that we do is really grassroots people who are gonna, get into the water or get their hands dirty and do what needs to be done, while still addressing, lawmakers who are often years and years and years behind in bureaucratic red tape. What we're doing as Shinnecock Kelp Farmers is legal for us because our leaders had the foresight to incorporate it into colonial treaties, our right to seaweed, And it's been established in case law since colonial times that we are able to do this. But for the average Joe engaged in aquaculture, until a couple months ago, it was actually illegal to cultivate sugar kelp. And so I think, it's still in the process of being figured out, and it's very limited geographically in this law that was passed by Governor Hochul to the Peconic Bay and Gardner's Bay. And so um, we're hoping to make a difference by being in front of that and using our hatchery technology to be able to get spools out fast once the laws and the policies catch up to the wider network of people who are interested in regenerative ocean farming. And we'll, be a couple years ahead and can provide the knowledge and the resources and the spools and have that seed that we need to get out in the water to expand our network, because no one person can do this together. No one person can do it alone. We have to do it together. We have to work together, and we need to work past any differences that we may have in order for for the sea turtles and the whales and for humans to survive in this climate crisis.
And have you seen, how do you measure the differences or the improvement of the water quality? Is there a technology or is there a way to measure that?
Yeah, so we're really at this fascinating and critical juncture between our traditional ecological knowledge and technology. So we know from the thousands of years of experience that our ancestors have had that this is an effective way to clean up the water. But now there are scientific ways to determine exactly how much carbon we're sequestering, exactly how many nitrates that we're removing. But another important thing is to educate people about the importance of building economies around this type of green industries. It's something that's so critical. People who are engaged in restorative and regenerative practices in the water need to be able to take care of their families. And so, there's like carbon credits, there's all kinds of programs for people who are polluting to fund those who are doing these types of green jobs and pay them living wages, especially for this area. We all know it's so expensive to live, but it's so critical to sequester this carbon, to remove these nitrates, and we need to pay people living wages in order to do that. And so we're in this really exciting partnership with Green Wave, who have started a climate fund. And so they are measuring the amount of sugar kelp that regenerative ocean farmers are able to grow and paying credits based on exactly how much nitrogen and carbon we're able to remove from the water. And so there's really, interesting possibilities there to make this meaningful work.
And are you actually also using the kelp that's coming out of the water? Because there's also a big industry now with all kinds of use for kelp, from nutrition to all kinds of other objects made from kelp.
Yeah, so traditionally we've used kelp for medicine, for food, for insulation. Right now we're using it for fertilizer because unfortunately the water that we're growing in is so polluted that it's completely unfit for human consumption. So we're not able to make any type of like pharmaceutical or medicinal products out of it. Do you have any?
I have eaten it.
Okay.
When I'm cleaning it, sometimes some comes off. And since we've raised it from, being these seeds, I can't just let it, float off. So I have eaten it and nothing, I feel okay. So we're hoping to eventually be able to offer a food product. We do get a lot of requests for food, and hopefully we will someday.
Thank you. And Gaelin, I want to also hear from you how you feel that your work can be, replicated, or how can you inspire more collaborations? How do you do that, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think that the one of the main goals of my work is to share all of these incredible places and the stories with people. So personally, I go into schools quite a bit, and that's a big part of my mission, to share with the youth, and to really create products that are create media that will inspire people to care, because not everybody's going to be able to go to the Arctic or go swimming with sperm whales or photograph the places that I've been. So it's really, how do we bring it to people in a meaningful way so that they can take action locally or get involved in other communities, and really just to care, right? So at the end of the day, that's really what it's about, is saying it's a big, beautiful world, and you need to look beyond that, look outside, not just, stare at a screen all the time.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is the narrative. Like, you were describing, fishery as a commercial enterprise. And, when I heard Taylor and Danielle talking about whales and or water, it's life. It's not just a commercial thing to
Right.
exploit.
No, exactly. And I
it's a
think that
mindset, right?
Yes. And I think that there's so often everybody, when I was in graduate school, particularly, everybody wanted to put a dollar value on nature. And I never understood that, because nature is just nature. Why do we need to have a dollar value on it to make it important? And I think that for me, there's a shift that needs to happen. But at the same time, I know that that is how people are going to value it. And most people value the ocean and the natural world as a resource that they can consume, whether it is for food or whether it's for their enjoyment when they want to go and, do some sort of recreation on the Shinnecock Bay or at our beaches. You don't want to be walking on a beach that's covered in sand, and you certainly want to be able to eat the sugar kelp that you're growing in the bay. And it's just, how do you, really create that shift in mindset to have an importance away from economy and resource as, a dollar value.
Right, and I think that's what's also important in terms of when you look at politics and policy, and I think there's always that big gap. How do you get to these people to actually make that shift? How do you convince them? And I think it's people like all of you that can hopefully do that.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, it's storytelling, and it's how you create your narrative. It's how you approach how you're talking about it. So I think, especially through art and different media, and then tangible things like someone seeing, the change that you can make on a local level or on a global level. But it really is about, telling these stories in a way that is non-threatening and in a way that people can relate to, that brings them into the narrative instead of making it something that they're just watching from afar.
I think that's very important. And I think that's also where, I mean, you mentioned storytelling, and I think art is a great way of storytelling. It's both visual storytelling and narratives. Kathleen, I'm wondering how do you see your role as an artist because you're very concerned. I know you're concerned about the water qualities on the East End. You all live in this area. So how do you feel like your art can approach it? And I'm also curious about your interest in technology. So,
Well, of course, I got interested in nanobots in the year 2000 when I read an article by Bill Joy, who did design Java, and he wrote an article called "The Future Will Not Need Us," and it was about how the potential artificially intelligent nanobots could indeed take over. And so that began to interest me. And I realized that there are many technologies that will absolutely help us, but we're afraid of technology. And so I try to make work that begins to introduce you to the idea that it can help us about the environment and nature. And we all need to, of course, consider that we would take a role in having it heal. I think there are, even though we don't want to put a dollar on the out of doors that we all love, it is almost a tipping point now where there are many types of businesses that do conservation that are starting to, and of course, we know that unless that happens, people won't invest in it. And so many businesses, solar energy, wind farms, sequestration of CO2, et cetera, they're important because they will build even things that create electricity in the ocean, like big sort of barges that create electricity. Those things that are very expensive to produce, we need to encourage our senators and congresspeople and people that we know to, we need to write them. We need to ask for this to go forward, and I think if we do, there will be changes quickly, because it actually is more profitable right now to do conservative business, to do conservation as a business, I mean, rather than fossil fuels. So.
Yeah, I think that narrative is very helpful to change the mindset. There's a really interesting science fiction writer, Kim Stanley Robinson, who just wrote the Ministry for the Future, and where he looks into the future, and he's on the one hand, he's a climate pessimist, but he's also giving hope, because he describes a lot of new technology that can suck carbon out of the ocean or to protect ice sheets, and it's quite fascinating. And obviously he informed himself, and he describes technology that is possible, that maybe now is still too expensive or to be used, but there's a vision. And what I'm also curious about is, do you see a possibility of traditional protection of nature to collaborate or to go hand in hand with technology? And that's maybe a question for all of you. Do you see these possibilities? Yeah.
For the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers, there's this real delicate balance of our traditional ecological knowledge with new technologies. And so one of the things that we experienced this season was we have to go through this process of wild diving for our source material. And it was very difficult because the waters are getting warmer, and it's harder to find the sugar kelp. It's harder to find that source tissue. And so we're at the point where we have to look at new technologies. And so we've been working with partners all across the globe. And we found a partner in the Netherlands who have developed this incredible technology. And it is a little jarring because for so long, our ancestors were able to just naturally cultivate and harvest seaweed, but now we are looking at a situation where we're going to become dependent on sort of a man-made creation of source tissue and cloning and breeding in more of a laboratory setting, rather than depending on these wild dives, because the oceans are becoming so unpredictable. And we don't know, everything is happening so rapidly. We don't know next season, is it going to take us, I think it took us 5 dives this season. Is it going to take us 7? Is it going to take us 10? Are we not going to be able to find something? And so we're really at that point where we have to kind of tip towards technology. But culturally, I think we've been raised as futurists, because we've always been taught that we have to vision for 7 generations ahead. And so Dan and I's generation is the 7th generation, and we're utilizing things that 7 generations ago our leaders had put in place for us. And so when we think about 7 generations ahead, technology is going to be what solves a lot of the problems that we're facing.
I think it's a really beautiful thing to think 7 generations ahead. I feel like oftentimes we don't even think about the next generation, what we leave behind and what we do. Gaelin, do you have any?
Yeah, no, I think that technology is certainly something that's extremely important in the future, for both conservation and our understanding of our natural world. I also think that technology in the past has hurt our natural world in extreme ways. So I'm hoping that we can sort of flip that
Yep.
so that it doesn't. So that, I mean, certainly industrializing fishing and all of the technology that we have to find that last fish, because we now can find that last fish or that last whale in the ocean, whereas before there could be, hidden areas that we wouldn't have been able to reach or be able to find them or listen to them or however we would find them. But certainly in all of my scientific research, the technology is what allows us to look at things in a new way and a new, exciting way to get that new knowledge that will help us hopefully protect things
Is there
more
any
accurately.
technology in particular that you feel hopeful about?
I think there's so many. I think that the fact that we can now explore the deep sea in such efficient ways is extremely exciting. From you know just the idea that all of these new crazy creatures are there that we're going to learn about in ecosystems and how they're thriving in different ways so that we can, and they're all pristine still, or a lot of them are, which is exciting. I also think that, being able to put a tag on a fish that is then becoming a sampling device is exciting. And also a lot of the drone technology, so that we no longer have to go on a huge ship, a 400-foot vessel, on these months and months long expeditions to learn about, the oceanography and what's happening in the ocean. Instead, we can take an autonomous drone, either a sailboat or these other submerged drones that will take all of the same samples without a person and without that, those carbon emissions and all of that impact. So I think that all of that is extremely exciting. But I mean, I could go on and on about the exciting technology that's there, but also, satellite technology and everything that we're learning. So I think there is, just as we add knowledge, then we'll just be able to, conserve things more. It's just we're sort of at this tipping point where it's like, will the technology come fast enough for us to save things, or are we going to be too late once we have that technology and that understanding?
Right. Kathleen, would you like to add something? I really enjoy looking at your bots. I find them really, they're great. They're really mixing, the nature and technology in a very unique way.
Yes, they're fun and interesting to make, to imagine. They're very imaginary. So of course, this point about doing things soon enough is really important. Because, for instance, nature has always sort of taken care of itself. And like the sequestration of carbon was, all the shellfish in the ocean were taking the CO2 and creating shells and storing it. And nature does that very slowly. And so technology now has to, in some way, take over that job. We have to find ways to sequester that CO2 or make a better loop of CO2 through photosynthesis, et cetera, through technology, and do it a little faster. And then maybe we can get back to the point someday that the Earth can do it on its own. Maybe we'll reverse all of these environmental changes.
Right, and there's a very good saying that technology is neither good or bad. It's the intent that matters, right?
Yeah.
I want to ask each of you, before we open it up to the audience, what would you recommend to individuals? What each of us can do to help what the work you're doing or in improving the environment?
Well, I would like to do I'd like to do a shout out to the turtle rescue of East Hampton. Certainly they take donations and volunteer help. They rescue mini turtles. And also locally in Suffolk County is the Post-Morrow Foundation, and they certainly protect lots of they acquire land and protect it. And so I'm sure that they can use any additional help locally.
I would say that we all need to be aware of our individual impact and make educated choices, whether it's how you're eating, what seafood you're eating, if you choose to eat seafood, or how we really interact with nature. And certainly one of my big things is single-use plastic, and making sure that you dispose and recycle it properly if you're going to use it, especially sort of the sheet plastic and things like that that aren't so recyclable. And then no balloons. I mean, like little things are so important. They all add up. And I think that we should all just know and make educated choices with almost everything that we consume to reduce our footprint on the ocean and nature, not just the ocean.
Yeah, and the information's available. So yeah.
Information's available. There's lots of great resources. I'm happy to share all of the resources that I have.
I would like to invite everyone to think of yourself as an ancestor and do your very best so that when 7 generations from you, when we go forward and they can say, yes, my grandfather, my grandmother did everything they knew that they could do with the information that we have, the best science that we have, to make this a better place for us. And we're hoping that it will be a better place.
I think it's really as simple as taking action. You know, you can't just sit back and think someone else has got this. You know, there's little things that all of us can do. And even with our kelp farming, I'm an attorney, Dan is a social worker. You know, you don't have to be a scientist to make an impact. You know, you just have to do what you're good at and build those networks, build those relationships. And partnerships, and we can figure this out together.
Thank you so much. I would like to open this to the audience. Does anybody have any questions to any of our panelists? Yes.
How do we aggregate all of this interest, all of that experience, and get it to be a little more focused? What platforms can we utilize to sort of keep this information in meetings like this going in a larger way? Because I think everyone that cares about nature wants to hear this. It's all exciting, like we did more little. And how do we get that all harnessed in a focused way?
Would anyone like to answer that?
Well, I think that maybe you could push something like that forward because you sound very interested.
Yeah,
you know, get people involved that you know locally.
I think that really is the ultimate question, is how do we inspire the people who are either not inspired yet or just have forgotten that sort of childlike joy that they got from, you know, walking in nature, you know. And I think how do you know, I think what I'm personally trying to do to solve that is to make all of the content something that everybody is going to want to see, not just, you know, sort of the preaching to the choir, so that, you know, the person who would not really think about a whale as something that, you know, they would connect with or care about, other than saying, oh, that's pretty, to say, oh, wait, no, that's sort of the entry point, because everybody likes whales. So what's like the moral of the story? Well, it's much larger, obviously, than whales. And then hopefully from that point, you know, you bring more and more people in. And I think that there's just a quick example is sort of how, you know, the straw movement, right? They started with talking about the straws, and then other people were sort of got involved and learned a little bit about plastic from that. And now people are like, you know, the straw, and, you know, it's sort of an interesting thing. Or litter, as we were growing up, you know, people used to toss litter and now they don't. And it's like, you look at somebody who like tosses litter. And so I think that it's all of the tools are there. It's just about, you know, again, that is really the ultimate question. How do we speak to the people who aren't listening?
And I think it's also about our own capacity and the areas that we work in. You know, we can take stories or information like what we hear today back to the line of work that we do and implement that. And I think that's certainly one way that we can do it.
I think one really important way that we can do this is to return land back to Indigenous people who have been, really incredible stewards of the environment for thousands and thousands of years. And when land is returned back to Native people, the entire environment, shows almost instant improvement. And so it sounds really like conceptual, right? Like, oh yeah, we can give the land back, but we can actually really do it. And there are local organizations who are doing it. There are nationwide organizations that are doing it. Locally, we have the Peconic Land Trust. Just recently acquired one of the highest points of the watershed and is in the process of returning it back to Shinnecock. Nationwide, there are groups like Indian Collective who are doing a lot of movement work to land back. And specifically, if you want to get involved with the Shinnecock Kelp Farmers, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Our handle is Shinnecock Kelp Farmers, and you can also email us at shinnecockkelpfarmers@gmail.com and ask to be put on our volunteer list. We're going to need some volunteers at harvest time.
When is harvest time?
Well, it will vary. So the kelp will let us know when it's time to come out. Because we're not using it for consumption, we can keep it in the water longer. So we'll be looking for it to start to degrade. We've already started to see little animals moving in. We did have some little mussels. We had shrimp today. I was shocked to see that. A lot of crab. So as we have more and more animals moving in and possibly eating, that's when we'll pull out. We're thinking possibly late May, mid-June, but we'll keep you posted.
We're happy to help you spread the word. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? There was another question? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for your work and your activism, especially. I did have a question to follow up, your point about land and land management and ownership. Are there other things in addition to the sugar kelp, as a kind of a traditional ecological knowledge? Are there other things when we think about Shinnecock Bay that we could be doing, drawing on that local ecological knowledge or traditional knowledge that we're not doing?
I think Dan might have something to add when I'm done, but I think just shifting the narrative, right? I mean, when we go out to the edge of Shinnecock territory and we look across the water, we see the homes of billionaires, literally, these are like $75 million homes, and it's not for a lack of resources. It's the way that people see the water and how they view the water and how they're raised to coexist with the water. It's not a commodity. It's not, something to dump your chemical waste into to dispose of something that is a burden to you. So I think really, like what we're doing here, storytelling, educating, shifting that narrative, becoming more connected, even as something as simple as going out, walking in nature will really do a lot to reconnect your spirit to water as being this precious thing that is a provider of life to all of us. And I think the American culture and maybe the global culture doesn't necessarily view water in that way. So I think we all have some work to do to make that shift in narrative and culture and worldview.
So sugar kelp is a very, very friendly thing to grow. It's helping us sequester the nitrogen and the carbon, but it's also creating a habitat. It's intended ultimately to attract other life, as well as to Stony Brook recently has done a lot of studies about how well shellfish does in the presence of sugar kelp. So we'll be creating a whole forest for everyone. And this is not just for the Shinnecock Nation. This is for everyone in this room and beyond.
I want to dive on it.
Any other questions for our panelists? No? Okay. I want to thank every one of you for sharing your story and the important work that you're doing. And we'll keep going. Thank you.